Are we doing it? Are we doing it now?
We're on, mate. We're recording.
Okay. That's it. Just spring it on.
And that will be part of the podcast. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Buying Management Mentors podcast. The whole point of the podcast is I'm the biggest believer, if it's in the mind, it can be managed. And I'm totally blessed to know some extremely intelligent people who are far more intelligent than me. And I say that with the greatest respect, far more intelligent.
But they weren't available, so you've got me.
And that's the thing. I'll introduce yourself before we deep dive what this podcast is going to be about, because this is going to be fascinating. Because I love the power of personality. Genuinely, I love the power of personality in business, because it is a big part, and it is that missing part for a lot of businesses. But do they understand the value of it, Danny? That's the power of it. We're always talking about helping people understand the power of the things that we do in business. So, Danny, introduce yourself. What do you do? Where are you from?
Well, my name's Danny Wareham. I'm an organizational psychologist who believes that happy bees make tasty honey. If we have the right environment, the right culture, right leadership, right support, then performance is a side effect of getting those things right. I'm based in Stoke-on-Trent, although I work all over the country. And hopefully that probably gives us a bit of direction for the podcast that do businesses know the power of personality? Well, hopefully they will after this, or maybe we'll create more questions and answers. Let's see how it goes, Cuddy.
So you are a business psych. We did a 5-minute. Actually, normally I do a 5-minute chat before the podcast. We had a 20-minute chat before the podcast, Danny, because you like to talk more than I do, which is fascinating. But I did listen, and that was the beauty of the prep before we start the podcast. Talk to us about why your psychology is different, and how many different types of psychology there are, and why yours is different.
Great question, because I think there's a perception that there's kind of one type of psychologist, but it's a little bit like asking, what does a solicitor do? Well, solicitors, they might do the same sort of basic training at uni, but then they specialize. So you could have a solicitor who does M&A or conveyancing or personal injury, and psychologists are the same. So there's kind of three main sort of flavors of psychology, which is clinical, kind of what's wrong with people, forensic, which is about criminality, and that's used for things like witness testimony in courts. And then there's organizational occupational, which is how do you make work not suck? And even within that area, anything that could influence people's behaviors will be touched on in that. So it could be talent selection and talent management. It could be ergonomics and workplace design. But ultimately, you're about how do you encourage the behaviors that are going to help your organization succeed. And that's what business psychologists, organizational psychologists, and occupational psychologists do.
And that is completely different to a business coach.
Yes.
And there has to be a distinction between that, because when we met at the conference last year, I was fascinated, because we talked about the personality traits, and you did mention, explain why the old personality traits such as DISC, Myers and Briggs are not. You have to put your take on it, Danny, because I knew I'd ask you, why is Myers-Briggs and DISC not going to be helping businesses as much, even though they've been used for such a long time? Because I remembered Myers-Briggs. I'm sure it was like something like 470 questions for me to find out I am an IFJQ or IFJP, something like that.
Yeah, the 4 letters.
How was that created? I'm sure I've got a book on it somewhere of what. To be fair,
yeah.
When I looked at the jobs I was suited at, I'm like, that is bang on. That is bang on. But tell me why Danny Wareham thinks differently.
I think there is a little bit of classism and snobbery in psychology. And some people in psychology will focus on whether a tool is accurate and what we call valid and reliable. The horoscope is not valid and reliable. It's complete rubbish. Yet it's in every single newspaper, every single magazine. If you Google today, there'll be news articles on Mercury is in retrograde. What does that mean for a Leo? Because we have an innate fascination in where do we fit in the world and how do we relate to other people. Now, some of these tools, what we call the Jungian tools, they attempt to group people together with you are like this type of person. So Myers-Briggs is, you're an extrovert or an introvert. There's no kind of shades of grey of being a little bit introverted or massively extroverted, or if you're extroverted, you're extroverted. How that came about, Myers-Briggs was invented basically because a mother-in-law didn't like the son-in-law, yet the daughter did. And there was this fascination, just like the horoscope, of why does my daughter like her husband and I don't like him? And that led to the kind of research, he'll do in air quotes, supported by the US Army under the guise of, in World War II, we can improve shell shock in returning soldiers by somehow understanding if they're a thinker or a feeler, or if they're introverted or extroverted. And
wow.
And and this is more interesting for me than the label that the tool produces is less interesting to me than two things. One, where did the tool come from? And two, what's the conversation afterwards? So I'm a Taurus. We already know that horoscopes are rubbish, scientifically. But if it drives a conversation between me and somebody else of why do I have Taurian traits? Why am I stubborn sometimes, but I'm dependable? And these kind of the traits that are apparently part of the horoscope, as long as that conversation takes place, that's where the magic is, not in the label of being a Taurian or being a red in DISC or being an ENTJ in Myers-Briggs. It's about having the conversation rather than fixating on the label.
Did you say ENTJ? Because that's what I would be.
If I was taking a bit of a...
I remember, I think that was the 4 letters. It wasn't I, because I'm certainly not introverted. I know that for a fact.
No, so in Myers-Briggs terms, the first letter is about your social connection, your energy. So E's are extroverts, so that kind of more gregarious is the way it's kind of phrased.
Yeah, I'm definitely an E.
The second letter is about how do you structure information. So do you read the recipe or do you just kind of wing it? Is the way they kind of
I wing it. Don't read the recipe.
So that's an
which
N
we've talked about before. Yeah.
A sensor. Thinker feeler. So do you use facts and evidence and so on versus do you use gut instinct and
gut instinct
situation, and then perceive judge, which is how does that manifest in the outside world? But there's not really any scientific validity behind Myers-Briggs. And even the Myers-Briggs website will tell you it's not a personality psychometric tool. It's there as a conversation and interest piece. The same as other Jungian tools, whether it be DISC or Insights, etc. They're designed to encourage conversations between individuals and teams for how can you work better together. And as long as they do that, I'm not overly precious about whether it's scientifically valid or not. There are tools that are more valid that I use. So, for example, we know that hostility is a personality dimension. Where does hostility show up in DISC or Myers-Briggs?
In drivers, in Ds. In drivers, because I've met some... See, do you know, this was one of my chat... Because I don't like labels. I'm just not a fan of labels and boxes. And the second you've got that label, I understand the power of identity. And it's genuinely, I know you said it's a conversation piece, as it said on the website, but I used to say that an awful lot. If you say, oh, I'm a driver, then do you carry on being that arsehole that wakes up in the morning and just drives everyone to, oh, well, I've done a test, so I'm a D, so I'm allowing myself to carry on and not have any empathy and not have any understanding.
Yeah.
But to be fair, I still get triggered by C's who are just calm and conscientious, to be fair. Because I'm like, make a decision for God's sake.
So the challenge with typing tools, though, is they say you're like this type of person. And there's far more complexity to you, Cuddy. There will be times when, and there's to all of us, there will be times when even the most unfeeling, non-empathetic, non-altruistic, what we call low agreeable person, there will be times when they are incredibly close to people. And, when people are in what we call their in-group, I am ride or die. Okay? I don't care about anybody else outside of my in-group. So you lose a lot of complexity by using typing tools. Excuse me. And the second is that your personality is kind of it's a bit like your default operating system. Throughout your life, you download apps, you download learned experiences, coping mechanisms, biases, and so on. So the behaviors, the language, the risk awareness, etc., that you actually demonstrate can be different in different contexts. The language you use with your friends on a Friday will be different to your family on a Saturday, will be different to the Monday with a client. You're being you and you're being authentically you, but your behaviors and your language and your risk appetite and all these things have changed and flexed because of the context and the situation and the social norms that you're in. So, and that's the important thing. It's not about, am I a red at my core? Am I highly agreeable or open to experience, or am I highly neurotic, etc.? It's about, how do people experience Cuddy? What's my experience of you? And if I was your family member, it would be slightly different than if I was a stranger. It would be slightly different than if I was a client.
Would that difference be because that's a fantastic question then. So would the experience of Cuddy be different depending on the knowledge of what Cuddy is, past the visage of the loudness, the jokey, and because I am pretty consistent, to be fair. Mm-hmm. I am pretty consistent in being bouncy, bubbly, and gregarious.
Yep.
And impatient when decisions are not made, because I don't think I'm impulsive. I think I'm decisive. I've had to change the label.
Yep.
Because I'm like, no, I'm just decisive, not impulsive. Now, would people's perception of me be different depending on the knowledge of length of time knowing me?
Yes, is the short answer.
Yeah.
So what you're describing so when we measure personality, there's the Jungian model, which is kind of what type of person are you? And then there's something called the Big Five, the 5-factor model, which is far more nuanced. And in the 5-factor model, what you're describing is high openness, which is, I like ideas and innovation, creativity and abstraction, rather than pragmatism and realism. Low conscientiousness, so I'm better at the last minute. I'm better being unstructured and flexible and adaptable. People broadly that have those two dimensions at that rate, they tend to be much more driven and ambitious and competitive, but they also can be easily distracted, go down a Wikipedia rabbit hole, etc. And also they can leave people in their wake. If you're working as part of a team, they can leave people in their wake because they're driven and ambitious and on to the next things. They don't stop and show gratitude and recognize the people that have come on the journey with them. So there's nothing inherently wrong with being high openness and low conscientiousness, as long as we have the self-awareness to realize what's the wake that we're kind of making. And the other people that are watching you might see you as, Cuddy in this example is forthright and competitive and holds himself to high standards and always wants an outcome, versus, God, will Cuddy just slow down for a minute? I can't keep up. I'm going to actually detach and just be a passenger on this journey.
Yep.
Okay. Now, whose responsible is it? And whose responsibility is that?
It's not far at all. It's no, Danny, it's fantastic. I mean, to the point of close to, it's not even cold reading, because I understand cold reading. Not even cold reading. And I was like, because when you first said low conscientious, I was like, I'm gonna have to Google that. I don't like the sound of being low conscientious, but I'm like, now I know what low conscientious is. And I'm like, oh yeah. And it's funny. It's not that I like gratitude for people. I do like to say thank you when we've got to the end. I'm like, look at what we've done together and stuff like that.
When the goal is achieved.
When the goal is achieved.
Yes.
It's not until we've gotten to the goal that we can get to where we want to be. And once we've achieved that goal, it's like, look at what we've done together as a team. It's not me, it's not I. And I've worked with people in the past, and people have been like, oh, but you're doing really well. I'm like, no, we're doing really well. We're in business together. Even if I'm 100 yards ahead, it's still a we. Doesn't matter where we are in the race. We're in a business together. So I don't give a shit if I'm 4 weeks in front of you. Still a we. I just sometimes will be pulling the rope 4 days in advance. That's all. Mm-hmm. Still a we. It's still like the relationship with my wife and things like that. It's still a we. We're completely different people, but my business is our business. Even though my wife does something else, it's still we. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter that I'm trying and gallivanting ahead, because I know that I'll need somebody to be, let me just check his work. Let me just check the coordinates he put into the GPS because he might be a little bit off. And guess what? They'll be right.
And that's what self-awareness is all about. So, and personality is how are you sort of wired to be energy efficient? So you're not designed to, your body's not designed to be in this time of plenty. You're supposed to be starving on a savanna. So your brain is wired in a way that's energy efficient. And for you, it may be that actually you save energy when you're being creative and being challenging and comfortable with tough conversations. So that's where you'll go to, particularly when you're stressed. It doesn't mean you can't be the opposite. It doesn't mean you can't slow down and just enjoy the flowers, but it actually takes you more cognitive load to do that. And a more simple example might be something that's a little easier to get our hands around. If we think of the classic introvert versus extroverts, introverts, you might think are quieter, tend to be more reflective, more poker-faced, etc. They use part of their brain that's about behavioral inhibition, so they tend to be more aware of risk, etc. Now, there's nothing stopping an introvert from being the center of attention, being highly sociable, being gregarious. They just have to know that it's worth spending that cognitive energy on. And introverts are extroverts with great taste. They do everything extroverts do. They're just much more selective who they do it with.
Oh, that's good.
There's nothing more garrulous and chatty than an introvert who's comfortable with the subject they're talking about and comfortable with the people in the situation they're in. You can't shut them up. And people that are low agreeable, exactly the same. It's not that they don't have empathy. They have empathy really intensely, but for a smaller, more select group.
Oh, I love that. That's a massive takeaway. Because I can be introverted in some. The thing is, I can shy away from crowds and banter when I don't need it. It is that ability to be able to turn it on when I feel that it's needed and things like that. So I do love that. So I do have times when I'm like, no, I'm not going out today. So
I'll go to the gig, I'll go to the party, but I'm going to drive home with the radio off.
Yeah.
One of the tenets of extroversion is demonstrability. So infusing others with your energy. I'm not demonstrative at all. However, as a public speaker, I know if I just stand on stage and just talk at people without dancing around, gesticulating, it's not going to be the same experience for them. So knowing that I have to play slightly out of character and spend that cognitive load, I always book the next day's morning off because I know I'm going to be exhausted.
Yes. I love that. So, and it's do you know that the whole talking on stages and things, I used to work at Royal Caribbean, and I was a cruise director, and we were on stages basically for 4 months every day, no stopping, and then 2 months off. I'd be like, I just no, and it would take me 10 days to decompress, and then I had to get back into it for 10 days before going back in. I had to start thinking, right, I'm going back to work, and that's probably one of the reasons why I know that the contracts were 4 months on, 2 months off. But I was like, I'm not getting 2 months off this year. No. It wasn't. And I was like, nah. Right. So I love the fact that self-awareness is key, and that's fantastic. So when we're talking to Danny Wareham, because the conversation that we had, I was like, right, that's the podcast there, is, first of all, narcissism in leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Where and why does that come about?
Mm-hmm.
It's part one. And part two, what is good culture? Because we said good culture is not puppies and pizzas on Friday. How do you create good culture via leadership? What was the word that you said? And I was like, right, we need to talk about that. How do you create leadership without
a leader?
Without a leader. That was it. That was it. So let's talk about narcissism in leadership. Where does it come from?
Okay.
And why?
So I think I should caveat this slightly, that there are no good or bad personality traits. They're contextual. So for example, if you take if you take extroversion, so someone being positive affective emotions is in extroversion, so cheerfulness. So people that are cheerful, bubbly, gregarious, social, demonstrable, those are personality traits and behaviors that come with extroversion. What happens if you're at a funeral? So those traits might be good in some contexts.
I do have,
but not in others.
I know, and I do have one of those things where I do try and stifle a laugh at a funeral.
Yeah, the same with agreeableness.
Thing.
Same with agreeableness. You start a business, you're a high agreeable person, so you're more empathetic, naturally empathetic. You're more collaborative. You love your networking events. You love getting out there and meeting new people. But it takes more effort to do low agreeable things. So hold yourself to account, ask for the business, chase payments, have those tough conversations. So there are no good or bad personality traits. And the same is true of what we call dark triad traits. So narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellism are three groups of traits that...
What is that? Tell me again. Dark triad?
Dark triad.
Right.
The dark triad.
Love this.
Yeah,
and I've not heard about this, Danny. So, and I was talking to a psychologist yesterday about the other triangle, which is victim, hero, and persecutor.
Yes,
so is this the negative? Is this like the deep? I've not heard of this before.
No,
so this is fantastic, Danny.
It gets a bit of a bad rep because, well, let's do a little test. So, are you or do you think these traits are positive? Just yes or no. So, I'm mentally tough. So when things go wrong, I always see the glass half full.
Absolutely. That's me.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm optimistic. If things go wrong, I can pivot and change direction quickly.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I'm going to come out as a narcissist out of this one. Yeah, that's a positive trait.
Okay. I'm able, if I need to make tough decisions, I'm able to separate the emotion from getting the tough decision done.
Nah, I struggle with that one.
Okay. I'm able to influence and inspire others.
That's a loaded question, because that's a cult leader question. Right? That's a cult leader question.
So that's a great point. So the first two questions...
not stupid.
So the first two questions are narcissistic traits. So at the top end of the dimension, you get your kind of Trumpian behaviors and the grandiose and vulnerable narcissism that we think of, that self-entitlement and I'm important and you're all beneath me. But it's a personality dimension from high to low. So there's a whole spectrum between. And actually some of the things that are associated with narcissistic traits are things like optimism and grit and resilience and being able to pivot, in part because you're special and the rules don't apply to you. Those are narcissistic traits. Being able to separate the emotion from the decision, that's a psychopathic trait. So if I have an accident and I need surgery, I hope my surgeon is a psychopath, because the ability to not see me as a person and get the job done, that's an important trait to have in that context. It might be bad if that surgeon is my partner. It depends on the context. And Machiavellism is about long-term strategic manipulation of others at the top end. But actually things like being charismatic, being able to build coalitions, inspiring and leading all come from that kind of Machiavellian spectrum.
Yes.
So in the West, we recruit for these in our leaders. We want leaders that are optimistic and challenging and challenge the rules and try new things and make tough decisions and inspire others.
Yeah.
And those are great traits to have, just like every other personality trait in some contexts. And sometimes, your business isn't doing well and I have no qualms about laying off 300 people to balance the books. Maybe that psychopathy might be a problem. So it's not a bad personality trait, it's the context that kind of matters.
Do you know, when you were asking the question about can you always see the positives in everything?
Mm-hmm.
I was actually thinking about Trump, because he never ever has a negative. It's like Teflon. He just will not acknowledge the negative.
Yeah, because he's above the rules. Not narcissism at the high end, in the sort of getting towards narcissistic personality disorder sort of end, comes in sort of two flavors. One is rooted in kind of confidence and low neuroticism, and that's grandiose narcissism. That's very kind of Trumpian type. I'm important. I'm going to peacock. You all have to sit around and tell me how beautiful I am. That kind of narcissism. But there is another type, which is vulnerable narcissism, which comes from a place of insecurity and high neuroticism. And these people can have behaviors that are a bit more insipid in organizations and groups because they're secretly jealous of other people's success. They can be very manipulative in the background. And yeah, so there are different types of narcissism.
I'm glad you've mentioned that. I've always seen narcissism as an insecurity. It's kind of one of those traits of they feel bad, so they want to make everybody else feel bad around them.
Yes.
And
secret jealousy of other people's achievements is a big one. Yeah.
But on the other side of it, to be fair, Danny, and I was speaking to somebody else about this, and I'm like, I have a feeling there's a lot of life coaches who are narcissists. And the more and more I'm like, and it's funny because I genuinely have never wanted to call myself a life coach for so many reasons. Mm-hmm. I've never liked a lot of the parts about them. I like the techniques of life coaching. I like the strategies of life coaching. But there's a lot of the grandiose side. There's always one guy that advertises, come and train with us and you can live in Bali and coach people from Bali. And I'm like, fuck off. I'm not giving... I would not want anybody to give me any money to coach in my life. Well, they're sat in Bali. That to me, but again, it's just it's a belief system within myself. And I actually have to check in on it. I'm like, am I the wrong? Should I be wanting to live in Bali? And I'm like, no, that's not how we help people. No, absolutely not. We don't help people online from Bali. But that's a belief system within myself. So the more and more I've gone into it, and I've got a couple of friends who have worked with some high-end, really big-name life coaches, and I had to ask them, I'm like, narcissism. They went, oh my God, 100%. I'm like, I knew it. I bloody knew it. I just knew it. So, because another side of narcissism is having that clear vision of this is where I'm going and this is what I'm going to do. And I'm not going to listen to opinions of others. There's a slight narcissism to that, right? So please tell me if I'm wrong.
No, of course. And it's when does that trait become damaging? Because there are some times, if your business is on its knees, and you need someone to kind of drag it by the scruff of its neck towards a specific goal and disregard the emotional impact of all the stress and so on, then actually having a more narcissistic and more psychopathic leader would be a benefit. But then what happens when the business recovers and is in a better position, but now it's all about the guy at the helm or the girl at the helm? That's when it can become, the context has changed, and that's when it can become a derailer. But there are no good or bad personality traits in isolation. It's the context that you're in. The surgeon example, them being a psychopath during the surgery, good.
You want that?
Them being a psychopath.
Bring me the psychopath. Yeah, I need someone to cut my liver out, not give a shit, and move on to the next person. But then when that person dies and the doctor says, "Yeah, I don't really care because I've got another one," you're like, "What a wanker!" That right? Yeah.
But then being a psychopath when you're out on a dinner date with them and the way they treat the waiter, you're going to get your food spat in. So there's trade-offs between, sometimes if we take a less controversial one, if you take agreeableness, then agreeableness is kind of where aggression sits on that dimension. People that are high agreeable think everybody's in their in-group. I trust everybody, and its trust is for you to lose. Can't we all just get along and the world will be a nicer place? But the trade-off is they can take on too much. They can want to be so much of the tribe that they become people-pleasing, and then they spend their time arguing with themselves in the shower. Okay? Low agreeable, they are more outcome-focused, comfortable with conflict, comfortable with tough conversations, hold themselves to account. But they can then be seen as they're very blunt and brusque and, have no emotion. Excuse me. Low agreeable people are directly aggressive. You know what you're getting with them because A plus B equals C. I'm not beating around the bush. It is what it is. High agreeable people become passive aggressive. So, and it builds up to a point where they actually become aggressive. So she won't like me saying this, but my partner's high agreeable. She's also high conscientiousness and high neuroticism. So I do all the cooking in the house.
She sounds like a treat.
She is. Yeah. Again, like narcissism and neuroticism gets a bad rep. But, Neuroticism, you never miss a deadline with neuroticism.
Nope.
If you're low neuroticism like me, deadlines, I love the sound of them as they go past because I wasn't worried about it. And there's pros and cons. There's no bad personality traits. But her mix means that when I cook dinner, I'll stir a pot, put the spoon down, look away, and the spoon's gone because she's washed it up because it was out of its place, it was untidy, it was making a mess. When I've finished dinner, she'll wash up straight away because the conscientious part of her wants to just get it done so we can enjoy our evening together. The agreeable part is, well, you did the dinner, so I'll do the washing. And the more emotional stability part, the neuroticism part, is what if we have unexpected guests and they come around and judge me because I've got plates in the sink. However, eventually, if I were to just take that for granted, randomly on a Tuesday night, a couple of weeks later, there would be a complete reversal in that agreeableness, and it would be a direct aggression of you treat this house like a hotel. And in business, in organizations, we see this where people that are quite comfortable helping others and giving advice and taking on the extra work in projects, all of a sudden out of character over something insignificant, just the straw that broke the camel's back, they will flip and suddenly be out of character because they show some form of direct aggression. And our natural response might be Sarah's out of sorts or Steve's out of sorts, but actually it's something that's been building up for a while because we've almost taken advantage of their good nature without realizing that being part of their in-group was so important.
Brilliant. Fantastic. So, moving on to the whole point of what Danny Wareham does and loves. What culture, using your psychology, makes happy bees to make sweeter honey?
So the answer to any psychology question is it depends.
Oh!
It depends. So my view is that there are no good or bad cultures. Okay, if we think of culture as being a strategic tool rather than just a nice environment, then culture is about what's the lubricant that helps the right behaviors for your organization. So if I were to say, if you take the Army's culture, for example, theirs is hierarchical, it's management by objectives. Some might say it's micromanagement because they want to know every detail within their platoon. High trust, but low opacity. I don't know what's going on elsewhere in the organization, only what's going on within my troop or battalion. And you're not going to do much, but you're going to do it really well. So high specialism. Now that is a great culture for the armed forces or for crisis management in general. Clear lines of accountability, that's what you need. If you take that culture and put it in Google, you stop all innovation. But if you take Google's let's try things and fail fast and there's no bad ideas and everybody's a unique snowflake and let's help each other out, when you put that in the army, some borders are going to change. So culture is not about creating a great place to work. It's about creating a place where great work is done. And the behaviors you need in one organization are totally different to another organization. And the challenge that most companies, most businesses, and most groups have is they start with the best of intentions of how do we create a nice place to work? How do we have happy people and perks and pizzas and puppies, as you said earlier, rather than what are we here to achieve and what are the behaviors that will help us get a little bit closer to that kind of North Star that we're heading for, and then almost reverse engineering back to go, right, what's going to encourage that? And if puppies and pizzas help you get closer, fill your boots. There's nothing inherently wrong with pizzas. Look at the size of me. But if you're just doing it, if you're just throwing artifacts because you think it's a nice thing to do, then you're probably going to be spending good money after bad. And the work I do is what are the behaviors, the strategic behaviors that will support your organizational strategy. And that's what I help organizations with.
How high is purpose on creating happy bees? Because work is purpose has to play a big part of why am I going to spend my time for that business? Because you basically said when you work for a business, you're selling your time for money.
Yes.
Where does purpose play in that? For businesses to tune into this podcast and go, right, I need to speak to Danny. Yep. Right, I need to get Danny's information from this podcast. What does purpose play in that?
You've kind of hit the nail on the head that purpose matters, and you use the words I and my. They matter to the individual. So for me, engagement, employee engagement, people engagement happens where purpose and passion intersect. Passion is, do I like what I'm doing? Am I seen? Do you notice when I'm not around? It's about do I make a difference? Purpose is, does what I do actually matter? Is it aligned to what I'm being asked to achieve and work towards? Does it align with my own individual values? And if those two things align, then that leads, it's a little bit more complicated, but that leads to more employee engagement. And employees that are engaged, there's lots and lots of studies about what a fiscal difference they make. They're 2.5 times more productive and 62% fewer absences and so on. But there are a couple of studies I really like about the societal impacts, and purposely engaged employees are more likely to put the bins out for their neighbours. They're more likely to donate their time to charity. And you said that being an employee, you are giving your time or renting your time to your employee to make somebody else rich. You have to make sure it's worth it. I would flip that on their head. Employers rent their employees from their families and the societies and communities they live in. They have a duty of care to return them in a better condition. And employee engagement leads to better outcomes for society, and employee disengagement is the opposite. There's links into things like domestic violence and divorce rates and so on. So for me, purpose absolutely matters, because you have to know that, you have to feel that what I do actually matters, that I'm making a difference. And there is no employee engagement without that. And without employee engagement, you end up with a compliant team and a compliant organization rather than a committed team and a committed organization. And that's where high performance sits.
So boom, I love that. So what you're suggesting is, to create high performance, you want high purpose.
You have to know how you contribute and that you matter.
Which comes back to what's their why. Because everybody's why is going to be different. Because that's what I wondered, especially for the culture. And we just did a podcast on culture, actually, because I've seen it's one of those. I don't know if, and maybe you can attest to this, because again, I just did another podcast with somebody else to ask this question. But there's a lot of buzzwords going around. Toxic work culture.
Yeah.
I feel is a buzzword for people just thinking it's so much easier to say it's a toxic work culture. I'm having a few days on the sick. I might be wrong. There's always a bias that I know that I run, which is, are we creating more victims? Because victims are easily manipulated.
Yeah.
So,
would you like to talk about toxicity?
Let's talk about workplace toxicity. Yeah.
So a controversial view. Just as there are no good or bad cultures, I also believe that there are no toxic cultures. Because if you think of the word toxicity, something that's toxic is toxic to everybody all the time. Yet there are people queuing around the block to work at Twitter, X. Now, where I think toxicity comes in is, if your organization says this is what we're about, this is our vision, this is our mission, our purpose, this is the difference we make in the world. People sign up to that. That kind of forms the psychological contract of, I want to be associated with that. Either as a brand or as an employee, you kind of walk my walk. However, when you're in the organization, if the day-to-day lived experience is different, if the talk doesn't match the walk, then what can happen at an individual level is you're now asking me to behave in a way that's incongruent with my personal values. And that is toxic to me.
Yes.
Right? Now, Elon Musk, love him or hate him, at Twitter, he has been very transparent with, if you work here, you are going to get berated, you're sleeping in the office, working long hours, and when you work there, it's just like that, apparently. Now, that should be admired for the transparency. There is a separate argument whether that's the right culture organizationally, because I would argue his strategy requires innovation, and actually you've created a culture basically of fear so that people won't put their head above the parapet and put their hand up and say, I've got an idea. But how many organizations are like Twitter, like Elon Musk, but pretend that they're like Richard Branson? And a couple of case points, if you look at teaching or policing or the NHS, People that get into policing want to make a difference generally in their local community. So they go in thinking it's about that, and actually it turns out to be about paperwork and risk management, etc. HR people get into HR because they generally either care about people or they've had traumatic experiences in their own employment and they don't want it to happen to other people. And then they get into the role and it's about risk management and paperwork and so on. So I've signed up to this dream of this is what I think it's about and this is what you say you're about, and you're now asking me to behave in a way that's incongruent with those values. And that's the reason there's so much stress and burnout and mental health issues, or part of the reason in those service industries where I signed up to treat patients and make people better. And now you've just got me cost cutting and worrying about efficiency savings, and I can only spend 45 seconds with a patient.
So, to your example, clearly there's a spectrum of toxicity.
Yes. And it's unique to us because we all experience the world subjectively differently.
But to decrease that, it would be, because that's, again, I always come back to Royal Caribbean. Not everyone liked it, but they nailed it.
Did they walk their talk? What they said it's about? They
walked their talk. We had our core values, and we had to live by those core values. Yeah. And when people didn't live, management, senior leadership, you're not living to the values that we decided, there was that lack of congruency. And those managers and leaders that came in and said, I'm not doing that, that's not how we're going to do. I've worked on ships in this company and this is how we're going to do it. The culture went down.
So for me, there's two parts for the kind of cultural argument. To reduce toxicity, how do you reduce the delta between what you say you're about and what the actual day-to-day experience is? So the closer your walk matches your talk, the less chance that you're going to have any sort of toxicity. And
people are not stupid. They'll see the lack of congruencies. Do you know what? And congruency for me is one of the most apparent things that if it doesn't match, people are just not stupid. They're not stupid.
No.
And they will see that, because I think I'm an extremely congruent person, because I couldn't be more open and honest about who I am in the podcast or when I'm talking and stuff like that. But congruency, people see past the congruency.
So the first part is that congruency. How do you walk your talk? The second is the walk going in the right direction? So does your culture actually encourage the behaviors that you need for your organizational strategy? And companies often do one but not the other, or neither. Because particularly small businesses, they become a kind of shadow of the founder. So you tend to get very similar role model behaviors in the people that work for that business. You tend to have been hired in very similar kind of model. So you get a kind of groupthink and a lack of cognitive diversity in some of these organizations. And you've started your business, you're a couple of years in, you never really invested in that. Where are we going? What's our vision? Where are we heading? So now you've got to a point where you're kind of just jellyfishing along on the current, not really knowing what quite to do. So we spend a lot of money on, shall we try this market or this product or this networking event or this social media strategy? And that can become expensive. You need that North Star. You need to know why people should come on this journey with you, which is that purpose part. And you need to have your measurables to make sure that you're making progress on that journey as well.
It's been fascinating. I've been taking some mental notes for how I'm going to apply it to my business. To be fair,
I'll send you an invoice.
That's why I do the podcast. I get it for free. So, top 3 things, just putting it out into the world. What makes happy bees and the honey taste sweeter, according to Danny Wareham? Clearly not Briggs and Boson, whatever the hell that thing was. Psychologically, what's the top 3 things any business could start doing tomorrow to make sweeter honey?
So, very first thing, you're a managing director. Where are you directing to? So what is that direction? What's that North Star? What's that vision that you're trying to make a difference in the world? That's the first thing. Because if you don't know what that is, then whatever culture you create, whatever behaviors you're trying to encourage, what are you aligning them to? So without that North Star, you're creating a commune. You're creating somewhere that's nice to work, but so what? What next? So that North Star, that what's our vision? Why do we exist and where are we heading? That's number one. Number two is who are you? So that's self-awareness of when are you at your best and when do you kind of derail yourself? I am high agreeable. I really struggle saying no to people.
Yeah, me too.
Particularly charities. So I get lots of requests, well, can you come and speak at this charity event, or can you do X, Y, and Z? And I genuinely find it really hard because it takes more cognitive load for me to deal with the conflict.
Yeah.
So I have a process that says I only do one charity day a month. It's 5% of my time. That way I'm not saying no, I'm saying not yet.
Yeah.
Now I only know that because I've got self-awareness of when I'm at my best and what kind of trips me up. So stage one, where are you heading? Stage two, who are you? And what's that self-awareness? And then stage three is what are those behaviors, which ultimately is what culture is. It's a collection of behaviors that are going to help you and your best bits and your derail bits get closer towards that North Star. So where are you heading? Who are you? What'll help you?
What behaviors makes the sweeter honey?
So it would be
different for every business.
Yeah, I'm terrible. I'm at my best when I'm being creative and adaptable and flexible. I'm at my worst when I'm having to be structured and organized. And you can tell by my speech pattern that sticking to a script is not when I'm at my best.
Yeah.
But how do I run a business if I don't know how to manage my calendar, manage my accounts and bookkeeping, turn up to clients on time? So I can either have processes in my business.
I have a VA for that. I'm absolutely shite at it. So I've got a VA. She's excellent.
Yeah, so it's either you have processes. Every Friday I'm going to do that painful bit and I'm going to reward myself with a pint afterwards, or I can delegate it to somebody who's trusted, who actually is really fantastic and at their best when they're doing that structured discipline type stuff. So that's what self-awareness is about. It's not about you changing your style and playing out a character. It's about knowing if you're a fantastic goalkeeper, do not waste your time practicing penalties. Find someone who will do the penalties for you or put processes in place so you don't have to take penalties. Be a goalkeeper. The last thing we need is someone who's average at penalties because you're a goalkeeper. Go and play to your strengths. But so few people, particularly when they're new in business, have the awareness that they feel they have to juggle all these plates on their own.
So playing to the strength, because this is a concept, isn't it? Is like, do you build on your weaknesses or do you play to your strengths?
My view is, unless your weakness is horrendous, and it's a derailer in its own right, which is very rare, then you go further with other people around you. So how do you create that kind of power team or that network around you where you can co-create together and you each play your position?
And how strange is that? Because that's how we started our conversation today, where I said, Danny, do you want to come with priority mind management? How weird. It's not weird. Is that not synchronicity? What's the word?
It's serendipity.
Serendipity.
Yeah.
Serendipity.
It's the old African proverb that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. None of us are as clever as all of us. And
love that.
If you create an environment, and this is what culture is, if you create an environment where you can be you, you can bring your superpowers, and use them in the right situations and right context. Not all the time, because sometimes we need to be somber and structured and organized. And Cuddy's not necessarily the right person for that. He could do it, but it's going to take him more cognitive effort and more cognitive load, and we're going to exhaust the poor guy. And actually his stress behaviors are probably, I've got to go and be social. I can't be alone. I've got to go and be with people. Okay? Again, I don't read minds. I read workplaces.
I say that, by the way. I said, I don't read. Do you know the amount of times I'm not a mind reader? I read your language.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm off the clock anyway. But that, when are you at your best? And then how do you find people around you that are able to kind of hold you to account, help you play out a character when you need to? Because sometimes we do. It's not all sweetness and light running your own businesses. Or cover those blind spots for you. You've done it with a VA. That's just one scenario.
Danny, this has been enlightening. This is literally the psychology of personality in the business. Is it the missing piece for successful businesses? Culture is different. Some key takeaways. Culture is different in every business, but what's the behaviors do you want and to get the outcomes that you want? And I'm sure, what did you say you'd work with? Simply Pay, Lego, and who else?
I have a range of clients from individuals to massive blue chips. Lego is one of my clients, M&G Investment Bank, who are quite a biggie. WorldPay, one of mine as well. Because it doesn't matter how big or small the business is, they're all made up of people. And all people have personalities. They all have their individual differences, and none of them work completely on their own. Even if you're a solopreneur, you still have to work with suppliers or customers, hopefully. So understanding more about yourself and how you relate to others and how you create the environment for those behaviors for success. Happy bees make tasty honey.
Happy bees make tasty honey. And on that bombshell, we're going to say thank you very much. And if there was ever an example of it's in the mind, it can be managed. What if it's in the personality? What if it's in the personality, which is in the mind, because that comes from beliefs and actions and the past, which is an extremely powerful part. So thank you so much, Danny, for being on to the Mind Management Mentors podcast. Extremely enlightening. Is there anything else you want to share with the world before I say goodbye to our over 20,000 subscribers?
So there's nothing that springs to mind other than a bit of, I'm normally quite altruistic and self-deprecating, but I am going to shout out that if something's piqued your interest, then by all means reach out and say hello.
Love it. And on that, thank you very much for tuning in to another enlightening episode of If It's in the Mind, It Can Be Managed. The Mind Management Mentors podcast is giving you the tools and the resources to genuinely make a difference within your life, within your business, and whatever you need to do. I come from a place of mindset and emotional health. Some people say mental health. I like to say emotional health, because stress, depression, and anxiety are emotions, and they can be easily managed, much more easier than we like to think. As always, big love from Cuddy. I'll see you in the next episode of the Mind Management Mentors podcast.